studios of ITN, the news with Dermot Murnaghan and Julia Somerville.
Good afternoon, welcome to the programme.
Hello, the headlines this Thursday lunchtime. Middle East peace in danger, the latest on the fierce clashes between Israelis and Palestinians. Gerry Adams in London, why the Sinn Féin leader cancelled his meeting in the House of Commons. And tourists flock to swinging Britain, but is it more to do with finance than fashion?
World leaders are warning that the Middle East peace process is close to collapse this lunchtime. It comes amid new and spiralling clashes in the West Bank and Gaza, in which Israeli troops have shot dead 23 Palestinians, including a 12-year-old girl. 2 Israeli troops have also died and at least 175 people are injured. The fighting is said to be the worst in recent memory. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Paul Davis reports.
Through the night and into a second day, there's no sign of an end to this violence. Even as the Palestinians prepare to bury yesterday's dead, there have been fresh confrontations with Israeli troops and more bloodshed. This was Gaza early this morning. Uniformed members of the Palestinian police exchanging automatic fire with Israeli soldiers. The Israeli army say the battle began when a Palestinian mob attacked Jewish settlements outside Gaza. It quickly became a conflict between 2 armed and uniformed groups, effectively a state of war. There have been hundreds of casualties and fatalities on both sides after a second battle between Palestinian security forces and Israeli troops in the West Bank town of Ramallah. Israel's new right-wing Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, here visiting the Belsen concentration camp in Germany earlier today, is returning to Jerusalem and the worst crisis of his 100 days in office. He says he's telephoned Palestinian chairman Yasser Arafat and asked for help in calming the tension.
What I would like to happen is to have the restoration of tranquility and to proceed on the negotiations that we have agreed upon with the Palestinian Authority.
The protest, which began when the Israeli government opened a tunnel between sacred Islamic sites in Jerusalem, is now threatening the entire peace process. Israeli and Palestinian leaders are under increasing pressure to halt the violence before the damage to that process is irreparable. Paul Davis, ITN.
Well, on the phone now from the West Bank town of Ramallah is our Middle East correspondent, Robert Moore. Robert, what scenes have you witnessed there this morning?
Well, we're witnessing here an extraordinarily prolonged and intense gun battle between armed Palestinian police and Israeli soldiers. In my time in the Middle East, it is still ongoing. There are people on the balconies who are opening fire. And caught in the middle is hundreds of stone-throwing Palestinian youths, many of whom are saying that there is a new Palestinian uprising underway. There are also many injured people here. We've seen them shot in the streets. Not just Arabs. A cameraman working for CBS News has just been shot through the chest. There is no sense that this battle is over, and certainly Israeli and Palestinian leaders are facing an immense challenge to try and calm this situation.
Robert, can the peace process recover from this?
I think it's looking increasingly unlikely. Sometimes these incidents provide a look into the abyss and simply underline the need for a peace process. But really, the amount of bitterness here, the amount of violent gun battles going on, not just here in Ramallah, but across the West Bank, in Hebron, in Bethlehem, also, of course, in Gaza, I think this makes the process of reconciliation extremely difficult. I think we're now deep in a crisis between Palestinians and Israelis, a crisis between Israel and the entire Arab world. These pictures will shock Arabs right across the region.
Robert, thank you very much indeed. And we'd just like to apologise there for a bit of a problem with the sound quality, but as you can understand, our correspondent Robert Moore was reporting in conditions of some difficulty.
The Labour leadership is trying to play down a row over the cancellation of the Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams' meeting in the House of Commons with the Labour MPs Jeremy Corbyn and Tony Benn. Mr Adams himself has accused Labour of conducting a McCarthy-style witch hunt and placing the 2 MPs in an untenable position. Here's our political correspondent Jackie Ashley.
Gerry Adams cancelled the meeting inside the Palace of Westminster because he said the 2 Labour MPs, Jeremy Corbyn and Tony Benn, had been put in an untenable position. But amid huge media attention outside Westminster, he disclosed he had just met the 2 MPs somewhere else.
I have met this morning with Tony Benn and with Jeremy Corbyn. I think it was a very informative discussion. I have met with MPs from all of the parties the Tories, the Lib Dems and the British Labour Party in the House of Commons and indeed in the House of Lords over the years. I expect to do that again.
Jeremy Corbyn was avoiding the media.
Could you turn the camera off? Are you turning the camera on?
The camera's on. What do you think about this?
I've nothing to say at the moment. Good morning.
The Labour leadership say he and Mr Benn won't now be disciplined, welcoming what they're calling a climb down.
I think it was a good decision. I think the Labour leadership acted very timely, because I think it would have been offensive at this time for the meeting to go ahead. What Mr Adams ought to be doing is encouraging and trying to get the IRA to call another ceasefire, rather than spending this time promoting his book.
Out of all this, of course, has come massive publicity for Gerry Adams and his book, which was launched not from the Commons, but from an Irish centre in North London this morning. While the Labour leadership is now looking into that meeting between Mr Adams and the two MPs outside the Commons, the leadership is still claiming victory because the symbolically important meeting inside the Commons was cancelled. Jackie Ashley, ITN, Westminster.
The Duchess of York indicated this morning that she intends to continue her legal battle to try to stop the publication of a book about her private life. She's let it be known she won't be deterred by having been told she'll have to raise £500,000 as security in case she loses. Tim Wilcox reports.
This is the controversial new book, Fergie, Her Secret Life, that the Duchess of York is trying to ban. Penned by Alan Starkey, a former US intelligence officer and now very much a former friend of the Duchess, it's said to be an explosive account of her relationship with financial advisor John Bryan, her separation from Prince Andrew and her money problems.
I'm very sorry. Can we follow this?
Yesterday, the Duchess managed to get a temporary injunction renewed, but must now find £500,000 as security, and she has just a fortnight. Starkey's publisher claims the Duchess wants a clear run for her autobiography due out in November.
I think her object has been to delay our book sufficiently to allow her book to have a good run into the bestseller list and a good run through the Christmas trade in the shops.
But with reported personal debts of more than £1 million, will the Duchess be able to raise the cash?
I think she'll be looking around for other people who might find it in their interests, the publishers or maybe even the palace, to provide that money.
And she does, of course, have some very wealthy friends. Last weekend, she was in Beijing as the guest of Hong Kong millionaire David Tang. Mr Tang is currently in London, and though there's no suggestion that he's footing any bills, friends of the Duchess say she's confident of finding the cash to continue the ban. Tim Wilcox, ITN.
Coming up in the programme, schools on alert after a dangerous paedophile goes on the run.
And a man with cancer becomes the first person to exercise the legal right to die.
But first, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Alan Beith, has launched a scathing attack on Tony Blair on the last day of the party's conference in Brighton. He told delegates that Labour has abandoned its traditional beliefs and gone adrift. As the conference winds to a close, Paddy Ashdown is about to tell his party to fight the election campaign of their lives. Hugh Pym reports from Brighton.
Paddy Ashdown made a point of coming back to make a second platform speech, but then this is the last full-scale conference before the general election, and he wanted to tell his troops, go out and fight the campaign of your lives. He set out policies this week, education and health in particular, which are distinct from Labour, and his deputy leader Alan Beith, in a scathing attack, accused Labour of having ditched its philosophy.
Policy in the Labour Party, where it exists, has been disconnected from the beliefs which have previously sustained the party. And if in opposition they can change their policies so readily and so repeatedly, what on earth would they be like in government?
But from Baroness Williams, a warning. We need Labour to help force the Conservatives out of office.
We have got to change the government. And I have to say that the Labour Party is a necessary part of that change, though I believe not for one moment a sufficient reason for that change.
Mr Ashdown will tackle the question of relationships with Labour when he rounds off the conference. He'll say he's learned from the party's successes in local government. He'll say there are ways of exercising power. Let's rule nothing out and rule nothing in. Keep our options open, he'll say. But in the meantime, let's campaign to win and elect as many Liberal Democrat MPs as possible. Hugh Pym, ITN, Brighton.
Well, earlier I spoke to Baroness Williams and I asked her if it was realistic for Liberal Democrats to focus on their own policies in the coming election rather than their future relations with the Labour Party.
Yes, it's realistic, because I think if we're going to cooperate with the new government, for us the most important things are certain core policies. They happen to be policies that broadly Labour has expressed sympathy with, and Tony Blair himself has expressed sympathy with, but not in the clear and specific terms that I think we as Liberal Democrats would want.
Do you ever see a day, as Alex Carlile hinted, in the future where the two parties, yourselves and Labour, come together in some kind of formal left-of-centre coalition?
Not like that. I mean, my personal view is that the European issue is going to be so tumultuous in its effect on the Conservative Party that I would by no means rule out, not least in the light of what Mr. Clark has recently said, that some pro-European Conservatives may actually find themselves looking for a home. And we'd be delighted to see them. I think we're looking at a real realignment of British politics, and I think the process is far from complete. I think we're now seeing what one might call the second stage, which affects the Conservative Party in the same way that the first stage affected Labour.
When you look at your own journey through the political spectrum, if Labour, when you left the party, had been the Labour Party as it is now, would you have had to leave the party?
I think the answer to that, Julia, is, I mean, clearly if it was like it looked now, I would have probably spent a lot more time thinking about it, because we saw very large differences of principle with the Labour Party at that time and with what we believed in. But I have to say that I think we're all extremely happy to be in the Liberal Democrats, because we see here a complete reflection of the things that we believe are the most important. It's that commitment that we still have to see, I think, Tony Blair making clearly. I don't blame him. I think he's done a wonderful job in modernising the Labour Party. But I think we have to say as Liberal Democrats that we have very, very clear commitments, and it remains to be seen whether either of the other parties share those commitments with the strength and determination that we do.
Lady Williams speaking there from the Lib Dem conference in Brighton. Now, a record number of overseas tourists visited Britain last year, according to a report out today. More than 23 million of them spent nearly £12 billion here. And some believe the cheaper pound is only a small part of the reason. They believe it's mainly down to Britain's hip image abroad, promoted by Oasis, British fashion, and the boom in classic films like Sense and Sensibility. Our economics editor, Mark Webster, investigates.
These are the images of a revitalised Britain, which the Tourist Authority insists are drawing ever-increasing crowds to this country. Tourism brings in nearly £12 billion a year, with 2/3 of the visitors coming from Western Europe. And there's been a further substantial increase this year. The Tourist Authority says the success of British bands like Oasis is also a major draw.
It's rather like the Beatles. When the Beatles broke through into the world fame that they achieved, this was something that did an enormous amount for Britain in terms of its image as a country. We're seeing the same thing now with Britpop and with the fashion designers.